Hello, everyone, and thanks for joining us on the program today. I'm Amarachi Ubani in Lagos. Let's get into it now. The U.S. and Russia may not agree on Russia's special military operation in Ukraine, but at least they agree on the fate of female basketballer Brittney Griner. Griner was freed thanks to a prisoner exchange agreed by leaders of both countries for notorious Russian arms dealer Viktor Bout, who had been held in an American prison for 12 years. According to President Joe Biden, Brittney is safe and on a plane home from the United Arab Emirates. Griner was arrested at a Moscow airport in February, but for possessing cannabis oil, and last month sent to a penal colony. The Biden administration proposed a prisoner exchange just last July, where Moscow had long sought Bout's release. Russia's foreign ministry confirmed the swap and said it had taken place at Abu Dhabi airport. The Russian citizen has been returned to his homeland, it said in a statement, although he was not yet thought to have arrived on Russian soil. Russian news agency said he was still being flown in Kurakhove airport near Moscow. I will have more on this in a bit, but there have been more attacks by Russia in Ukraine this week. Even yesterday, the town of Kurakhove, east of the country, according to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. In his nightly address last night, he said people were injured in the market, the elevator, a petrol station, a bus station, and even in a residential building. A deputy head of Zelensky's office, Kirill Tymoshenko, earlier denounced the attack in a posting on the Telegram messaging app, accompanied by video footage of buildings in flames. President Zelensky said Ukraine is increasing the electricity supply every day in the country, which have been affected by the Russian missiles, but noted problems in Kyiv and several other regions.
Today, the Russian army struck Kurakhove. Very fierce, absolutely calculated, especially at peaceful people, at ordinary people. On the market, a grain elevator, a petrol station, a bus station, and on a residential building. Presently, the list of dead stands at 10, with many injured. My condolences to relatives and friends. Eternal memory to all victims of Russian terror. We are constantly increasing the generation and supply of electricity. We are increasing the volume almost every day. But we should not forget, and everyone should not forget, that it is now impossible to restore 100% of the energy system to how it was before the beginning of the Russian energy terror. Time is needed. That is why scheduled blackouts continue in most cities and districts.
Russia says its troops are taking part in tactical exercises in Belarus amid fears that Moscow is pressing its ally to get more involved in what Moscow calls its special military operation in Ukraine. Belarus has said it will not enter the conflict, but Belarusian President Alexander Lukashenko has in the past ordered troops to deploy, with Russian troops near the Ukrainian border citing threats from Kyiv and the West. Video clips posted by the ministry showed Russian soldiers in snow gear training near tanks in the winter landscape, firing weapons, including artillery. In a statement, Russia's defense ministry said servicemen of the Western Military District continue intensive combat training on the ranges of the armed forces of the Republic of Belarus. It added the combat training events are held during both daylight and even at night. The European Commission President Ursula von der Leyen has proposed a ninth package of sanctions on Russia over its invasion of Ukraine that would include almost 200 more individuals and entities on the EU's sanctions list. Commission President Ursula von der Leyen said it favored new sanctions against 3 additional Russian banks and new export controls and restrictions, especially for dual-use goods like key chemicals, nerve agents, electronics, and its components. She said in a video statement, Russia continues to bring death and devastation to Ukraine and is deliberately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure, seeking to paralyze a country at the beginning of the winter.
It is seeking to paralyze. Russia continues to bring death and devastation to Ukraine. It is deliberately targeting civilians and civilian infrastructure. It is seeking to paralyze the country at the beginning of the winter. But we stand by Ukraine, and we will make Russia pay for its cruelty. The 8 packages of sanctions that we have issued so far are already biting hard. But today we are stepping up the pressure on Russia with a 9th package of sanctions. First, we are proposing to add almost 200 additional individuals and entities to our sanctions list. This includes the Russian armed forces, as well as individual officers and defense industrial companies, but also members of the State Duma, of the Federation Council, ministers, governors, and political parties among them. This list covers key figures in Russia's brutal and deliberate missile strikes against civilians and in the kidnapping of Ukrainian children to Russia. Second, we propose to introduce sanctions against 3 additional Russian banks. This includes a full transaction ban on the Russian Regional Development Bank to further dry out Putin's war chest. And third, we also want to impose new export controls and restrictions, particularly for dual-use goods. This includes, for example, key chemicals or nerve agents, electronics, IT components, all what could be used by the Russian war machine.
Back to the Russian president now. Vladimir Putin says the risk of a nuclear war is rising, but that Russia has not gone mad and sees its own nuclear arsenal as purely defensive deterrent. He said, however, that Russia would defend its territory and its allies with all available means, adding that it was the United States, not Russia, that has deployed so-called tactical nuclear weapons in other countries. The Russian president was making the address to council members. Later, he confirmed that Russia is attacking energy infrastructure sites in Ukraine, but put the blame on Ukraine with the attack on the Crimean Bridge. He also accused Ukraine of not supplying water to Russian-controlled Donetsk and said such acts amounted to genocide. He said the international uproar over the strikes would not interfere with Russia's combat missions in Ukraine. Meanwhile, Germany's Chancellor Olaf Scholz says the risk of nuclear weapons being used in the Ukraine conflict is lessened for the time being. He said Russia has stopped threatening to use nuclear weapons in response to the international community marking a red line. On Wednesday, President Vladimir Putin suggested Moscow would only use nuclear weapons in retaliation. But the US announced the comments as loose talk. Russia's capacity to use nuclear weapons has come under increased scrutiny since it invaded Ukraine in February. In an address to the nation in September, President Putin had said the country had various weapons of destruction and would use all the means available to them. He also added he was not bluffing. In an interview earlier today, Mr. Scholz said that his recent visit to China had contributed to putting a stop to the threat of nuclear escalation. He says that he and Chinese President Xi Jinping were in agreement that nuclear weapons must not be used in Ukraine and that the G20 countries had reaffirmed this position shortly afterwards. I want to bring in geopolitical analyst Adebayo Adeleke to talk some more about this. Adebayo was once a major in the United States Army. He also did a number of tours in the Middle East. We've been drawing from his experience with the wars, especially in this military operation that Russia has in Ukraine. Major, thank you for making time to be on the program today. What do you make of this statement by German Chancellor Olaf Scholz? Do you believe what he says, and the risk of nuclear weapons being used in Ukraine, the Ukraine conflict is low?
Thank you so much, Amarachi. It's good to be here again. I understand what the German Chancellor is trying to do because this particular war is getting prolonged, and the more it's prolonged, the more people lose interest. And for Germans and the other European countries who are currently suffering from energy issues at the moment. I just heard from a friend in Europe right now complaining and lamenting about the heat. It's becoming apparent for them that they're losing traction of their support for this war. What does it mean? So this rhetoric of the use of nuclear capability by Russia is probably the most adverse position that a politician can use to actually rally more support for their support in the Russian and Ukraine conflict. So that's what I see, because from my standpoint and what I've seen played out so far, I know Putin is a rational player, and I know Russia is trying their best to kind of surmount Ukraine in this particular conflict, but to use a nuclear weapon is just out of it for me. I mean, I don't see anything, and understand that Russia is quite irrational, but I don't think at this particular point in time he'll go that route, because if he does, I mean, the risk that the rest of the world is just going to sit on their hands and just wait, I don't think so. I don't think Russians will do whatever to stop him as well. So I don't buy into that. I don't buy into that Chancellor's rhetoric, but I understand why those statements were made, because the support for Ukrainian war is getting worn off on people as well, especially when you're facing cold and heat issue over there in your country. So I completely understand.
Yeah, but the Russian president does say that the risk of nuclear war is on the rise. That also means that he's considering using nuclear weapons. So what can organizations like NATO do? And I know you people in the intelligence communities, you already know, Putin's next move. You can try and second guess, what he plans to do next. What can organizations do, perhaps, if the Russian president is seriously considering a nuclear war in Ukraine?
So especially when it comes to these things in military decision-making process, so you have different courses of action. You have the most probable course of action, which is like, okay, continue to pound this, and hopefully they can actually win the war on. They can actually do the ground war, but knowing the United States and NATO and the way they plan their operations, I mean, the use of nuclear weapon is not off the table. They will have it as a cause of action, but it's not the most severe or adverse cause of action. So it's not going to meet them in surprise. I mean, they're not going to be surprised at any point in time if Putin actually uses it, but they are not prepping for it to be the only way that Putin is. So both of them actually is a chess game. So he's saying that I might use it. Is okay, if you use it, that's fine. We are not preparing for you to use it, but if you do use it, there is a way to counter it as well. Because I know, at least really from comp plans and all this plan made for all these different kind of conversations, if you have a nuclear capability, it is always an option that you, at any point in time, if your back is against the wall, you might actually use it. So at any point in time, I mean, I know Putin is irrational. He's a rational player, and he has said several times that he's not going to use it unless he has to defend his country. But at any point in time, maybe he wakes up one morning on the wrong side of bed and feel like, you know what, nuclear capability is the way to go, and he uses it. I believe the NATO will be ready to retaliate as possible.
As we move further into the war in Ukraine, do you think that Russia is gearing for even more devastating attacks, nuclear weapons aside, especially within the winter months?
Absolutely. I think the victories from the Ukrainian side has given them a lot of hope in these past few weeks. They've gained a lot of grounds, and this ability for Russian military to be able to gain traction is also demoralizing for their troops as well. So, but he's really amped up the antics, and he's bringing more people in. I don't know where he's getting them from, but he's bringing more people in. And I think NATO and all the allies supporting Ukraine at this particular point in time has really used the first phase of this operation to kind of see the strength and weaknesses of Russian military. And I think the most devastating part is the use of nuclear capability. Anything else, I think they can actually contain it. So that is where the thing is, how long this is going to take, and how long the support for all these countries supporting Ukraine is going to warn off. And I think I said it on this show before that it's the battle of the will. Whoever has the grit the most is going to come up on top. And the way things are going right now, both nations are not backing down. Whoever backs down first is going to be. But I've always maintained this situation. I think the Western nations and other people that are in agreement with with the position of Russia, needs to come up with a plan to let Russia bow out of this particular conflict with grace. If not, it's going to be escalating. I think giving them a way out so that they don't lose face is going to be probably the best course of action for Russia to kind of not being the bad guy out of it. There are ways diplomatically that this can be shaped, but until then, they don't want to lose face, and I completely understand. Because if anything that has happened to Russia has happened to any other country in the past few weeks, they probably would have bowed out. But Russia refused to bow out, and they continue to do whatever necessary. So that's why the use of nuclear capability is a possibility for nations. Like, look, if this guy continue to push forward, despite the fact that he's suffering a lot of defeat along the way, use of nuclear capability to save face might be the last resort. So I understand those school of thought on that sense as well. But I think the Western nations need to come up and give a way out for Russia out of this.
Thank you so much, Major Adebayo Adeleke. We always draw from your experience. You served in Afghanistan. You also served in Iraq, and I know that you saw, the battle firsthand. So your experience invaluable, of course, to the Ukrainian people who are witnessing what's going on, and we've seen, the loss of power across Ukraine, the load shedding that's going on, just so that electricity can get to as many people as possible. On the side, when things like this happen during a war, what do you think the psychology of the people are, who are actually going through this, not knowing when the war will end, and not knowing exactly what's going on outside, relying just on bits and pieces of information coming from the media within the country?
It's very bad. It's very bad, and especially cold. And I don't know if you've had the opportunity of being that part of the world during this time of the year. It is devastating. The cold out there is not something to joke with. It's not for the weak or faint-hearted. So for guys fighting there and now, they must have a higher cause that is greater than what they are actually suffering physically. And I think that is where the Russian that's where the Ukrainian has a bit of an emotional and psychological edge, because they have a lot more to lose. And I don't know if a Russian soldier will be able to persevere through the cold. It's a very nasty cold out there. And I don't wish it on my worst enemy, especially if you've been in that side of the world, especially during this time of the year. And so the rationing, the psychological warfare that they are playing with the use of it, yes, it will break a soul. But I think because they have a higher demand, higher call, to save their country, to fight for their motherland. And I think that's what has been resonating among Ukrainians and people that are supporting the country of Ukraine through this, is to be able to push through this. It can break a soul. That particular code and the use of tactics being used by Russia, kind of targeting the energy facilities and whatnot, can break a soul. And if care is not taken, if this thing is persistent enough, it actually it can really a lot of people will kind of get tired of this. But from my perception and what I've read and what I've talked to people on the street in Ukraine, that they are really motivated, that they understand that this is going to be a long, drawn-out one, especially during this time, and they're willing to do whatever is necessary to preserve their land. So I'll give Ukraine a hedge over here, but again, anything can happen. You don't know how irrational people can think when the environmental condition worsens.
Indeed. Our thoughts, of course, with the people of Ukraine and places where there are conflicts all across the world. Thank you again, Major Adeleke, for joining us on the program.
It's a pleasure.